Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're reaching the end of a long journey in The Last of Us Part 1. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Before we really get started, I want to say that while I've really enjoyed covering The Last of Us Part 1, I don't currently have any plans to cover the sequel, The Last of Us Part 2. That could change based on requests and feedback, so if you would like to see me cover Part 2 at some point in the future, let me know in the comments below. With that out of the way, we can get into the final episode of the Philosophy and Ethics in Games breakdown of The Last of Us Part 1. At the end of the last episode, Joel found himself in a scary situation. He just plummeted from the second level of a building onto a piece of rebar, and depending on what that metal bar pierced, he might find it impossible to walk away from this one. Ellie scrambles down to help him, and after dealing with a couple more bandits, she is able to pull him up against all odds. Medically speaking, there are so many organs and bones that piece of metal could have hit, and in all truth, pulling him free was the worst possible move they could have made. Sure, there were bandits all around, and it isn't like there's a hospital to take him to, but in an actual emergency situation where you find yourself impaled by an object, pulling the object out could mean severing arteries or causing further harm. But Joel got lucky. There were no internal injuries to speak of, and he managed to miss his spine and somehow didn't puncture any organs. He also, thankfully, had Ellie there to help him fight off the rest of the raiders, and before long the pair of them are out of the lab and escaping the area on horseback. Joel isn't completely out of the woods, however, and he winds up passing out and falling to the ground before they can get too far, leaving Ellie to drag him into a nearby mall where a roll of duct tape comes in handy to help temporarily cover the wounds on his back and stomach. Once Joel is more or less stable, Ellie sets out into the mall itself to try and find some medical supplies. Ideally, she'll be able to locate something to stitch him up and maybe some meds, but while she's doing that, we can focus on what must be going through her head. She's smart, so she knows the odds aren't exactly in her or Joel's favor at this point, and she's likely dealing with a flood of emotion given everything that's happened recently. Between the events of Pittsburgh, which would still be on her mind even months later, and the fight that she and Joel had before eventually leaving Jackson together, not to mention her fear of being alone, this whole situation with Joel probably feels like some kind of horrible nightmare that she can't seem to wake up from. It's an emotional trauma that would be tough to deal with if she were living in a perfectly normal world where zombies weren't running around. And if I had to guess, I'd say she's probably bottling it all up pretty deep inside in the short term as a survival mechanic. The argument has been made from time to time in the comments on some of my videos as well as other places that surviving in the apocalypse would require things like giving up morality and ethics and being able to kill others before they had the chance to kill you. But not many people think about or talk about the emotional toll that would take and how bottling that emotional stuff up would affect you in the long term. Ellie would be dealing with survivor's guilt from losing people like Tess and Sam, PTSD from the horrific events she's witnessed and taken part in during this journey, the normal hormonal changes that come along with being a teenager, a flood of anxiety knowing that around every corner there could be a raider or zombie waiting to kill her, worry about Joel and what might happen if he doesn't make it, and a flood of other emotions and worries tied to what is going to happen if/when they get to the Fireflies. A little of that has slipped out on a couple of occasions, most notably when she tore into Joel at the farmhouse, but for the most part she's kept it all bottled up and stayed focused on the mission at hand at all times. Even going through the mall, she seems more focused on the moment at hand than the things that she's been through or might go through. And while that can be helpful in the short term to help her stay alive, in the long run she's going to suffer more and become someone that no one wants to be around. Bottling up your emotions and not dealing with the events and trauma you've gone through can lead to problems with your mental health later on, as well as physical issues and problems with interpersonal relationships. The best thing you can do for your own mental well-being is to spend some time reflecting on your own feelings and trauma and finding an outlet for your emotions that helps you deal with them instead of keeping them deep inside. But Ellie's emotional trauma isn't even the biggest of her concerns in the moment, as she winds up running into more raiders. They followed her and Joel, tracking them to the general area of the mall, and honestly, they're just getting annoying at this point. That's partially a knock on the trope of needing some kind of external threat in games, but it's also a knock on the raiders themselves, as you would think at some point they would just cut their losses and run. Joel might have been injured in the last encounter, but even so, he and Ellie took out a metric ton of them, and they just keep coming. No matter how long I live, I will never understand the concept that so many bad guys in games, movies, TV shows, and presumably real life have, where they need to get revenge for perceived slights at all costs. At some point, you have to just accept defeat and go home and lick your wounds. You can't win every fight, as there will always be someone bigger and badder, or at a minimum smarter, and knowing when a battle or war is lost is key to surviving. That being said, they have a reason to keep coming, and it won't be long before Ellie comes face to face with the monster behind them. Ellie manages to handle her business at the mall and get Joel stitched up before getting back on the road. He still isn't doing well, and after a while she winds up seeking shelter and searching for some kind of food. Winter has set in, meaning the options aren't exactly plentiful when it comes to finding something to eat, but thankfully Ellie learned how to bow hunt at some point, and she's able to track down a deer that's just asking to be eaten. The task of actually killing the thing won't be simple though, and she winds up shooting it several times before finally tracking it to a small mine hidden somewhere deep in the Rocky Mountains. The first time through this section, I figured something was up, as things were just a little too quiet, but I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. As Ellie is walking up to the downed deer, a pair of men come out of nowhere to greet her, and I got some really bad vibes from them right away. There was just something off about them that I couldn't quite place, and even as they introduced themselves and tried to act friendly, I found myself telling Ellie to get away as fast as she could. The men, David and James, claim to be a part of a larger group that has a home nearby, and they even offer to help Ellie out by giving her some antibiotics in exchange for part of the deer that she's just killed, after she makes it a little too obvious that she needs medicine as David starts listing off things they could help her with. Now, this makes some sense as she wants to save Joel, and that kind of desperation can make people do some crazy things. But as we'll find out shortly, David's actions here actually make no sense, and he dooms himself from the start. In case it isn't incredibly obvious, David isn't as friendly as he seems. After sending James to get the antibiotics, David starts trying to get Ellie to talk before the pair of them team up to fight off a horde of zombies that appears kind of out of nowhere. They manage to successfully fend off the infected, and a short while later they're having a conversation around the campfire once more like nothing happened. During this conversation, David reveals to Ellie that the men that she and Joel fought with back at the university were from his camp, and it's pretty obvious he's holding the pair of them responsible despite the nonchalant way that he's approaching the situation. David's group has apparently been suffering over the winter, and he'd sent some men to scavenge a few weeks prior. Only a few of those men came back, reporting that they'd run into a man and a little girl who had managed to slaughter the majority of them. As Ellie is apparently the only little girl in the world, David figured out it must have been her that was responsible, and he decided to play around with her a bit. I could give a complete play-by-play and go through her trip back to Joel to administer the medicine that David inexplicably provided, then talk about how David's men tracked her down, forcing her to try and lead them away before being captured. But what I want to focus on here instead is David's character and actions. See, he is a manipulator who has likely become very good at getting people to go along with whatever he wants them to do. He's also convinced, incorrectly, that Joel and Ellie need to pay for what happened to his men. The problem is, his men shot first. I mentioned very briefly at the end of the last episode that it was important to remember that little tidbit as it would come up later. And now we can really focus on it because you don't get to send out a group of men to scavenge, have them open fire on a pair of people unprovoked, and then complain later when your people got killed in the fight. And make no mistake, the actions of his men are a direct reflection of his leadership. They are acting the way they are because he not only accepts it, but also encourages the brutal nature of being what amounts to a group of raiders. We'll find out in the course of things that he really does have a group that consists of women and children as well as men, but that doesn't excuse his or their actions, no matter how desperate they are. They've also resorted to cannibalism, which is something we've discussed at length when covering the second episode of Telltale Games' The Walking Dead. But there's a lot of missing information here about them that bothers me a lot. For instance, we're 20 years into the outbreak at this point, and this seems to be the first bad winter the group has experienced. We don't know how long they've been together, how long they've lived in this particular area, how big the group actually is, or why they are actually struggling. Cannibalism isn't something that people resort to lightly, and there's only been a small handful of documented cases where people actually tried using it as a means of survival. Generally speaking, it isn't easy to get people to go along with eating other human beings, even when they're starving to death. Even in the most famous case of cannibalism, the Donner Party event of the mid-1840s, not everyone was willing to eat the flesh of their fallen groupmates, and many of them resorted to eating things like the oxhide carpets they had with them rather than desecrating the bodies of the fallen. The overall actions of the group to that end aside, we see something even worse as David manages to capture Ellie and lock her up in a cage. She doesn't take that lying down and manages to break one of David's fingers as he is attempting to groom her. That's really the only way I can think of to put it, as he almost seems infatuated as he's talking to her. He offers her food and tells her that he needs her help to convince the others to let her live, despite what she did to his men. And he gets way too close to her as he puts his hand gently on hers. She sees through this bullshit and pretends to go along just long enough to bring his guard down, allowing her enough of a surprise moment to actually snap his finger, and this might have been one of the worst moments in the game for me. I would normally save this kind of breakdown for a friend or foe episode, but I'm not sure I could make one on David that would work as anything other than a further condemnation of him. He's manipulative, underhanded, and a creep to say the very least, and he has zero redeeming qualities. He's also full of himself, and like most villains, his hubris is what ultimately brings him down, as he is convinced that he can manipulate Ellie into joining his group and becoming what I can only assume is some kind of wife down the road. He offers her medicine for Joel as a way to pretend that he is on her side. Then he reveals he has a second gun that she didn't know about and helps her take out zombies, saving her life in the process and gaining trust. Also, he can flip the script and show how much mercy he has, even as he points out how bad what she did to his men was. The medicine he gave her actually wound up being a net positive for her, though. As she's dealing with being locked in a cage, Joel wakes up, having fought off an infection thanks to the antibiotics, and he sets out to find Ellie despite still being gravely injured. It might have been hard to figure out where she went, though, if not for some help from some of David's men. Joel managed to capture a couple of them, and we're reminded of who he really is as he does some pretty horrible things to make them talk. Normally, I would say that hurting them wouldn't be of much use, but Joel manages to get the information out of them by walking a very thin line before taking them both out of the world. At the same time, Ellie manages to escape David, fleeing into the town before making her way through the streets as she tries to find a way out. In the end, she winds up in a final battle with David where he promises to do some horrible things to her before she finally uses his machete to make sure that he can't hurt anyone ever again. As she's finishing him off, someone grabs her from behind. Joel has overcome the odds to find her, and as she realizes who it is and comes down from the panic, he embraces her and tells her everything is going to be alright.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Joel.
It's okay.
From a narrative standpoint, we've come full circle. Joel has overcome his earlier fear of getting too close to Ellie, even using the same words that he used with Sarah back in the very beginning of the game to comfort the girl who has more or less become a surrogate daughter to him. But their journey isn't over, and as hard as facing David was, the final leg of this tale is going to be the hardest yet. Finally arriving in Salt Lake City, emotions are running high for our pair of heroes. Joel is upbeat, ready to get this whole thing over with and move forward, maybe even taking Ellie back to Jackson with him to try to make a bright future alongside Tommy. Ellie, on the other hand, is still struggling to deal with what happened in the Lakeside Resort with David. That kind of trauma doesn't just go away, and while she still has a mission to complete, she's going to need a lot of time to process everything, and she will likely never fully move past what he did to her. Despite that, the pair do manage to share a couple of great moments worth mentioning, with the biggest one being the chance to pet a giraffe. That sounds kind of funny, but as they're making their way to the medical facility, Ellie spots a herd of giraffes walking through a baseball park, and Joel is able to get close enough to pet one, bringing Ellie over to do the same before the pair share another moment overlooking the park and talking about what comes after the Fireflies. Joel makes an effort to let Ellie know that they can still turn around and just go back to Tommy's, though she isn't too keen on that idea as she doesn't want the whole trip and her actions along the way to be for what seems like nothing. On the surface, that makes some sense, as if there is a chance the Fireflies can create a cure using her blood or something like that, it would be kind of pointless not to at least give it a shot since they've come all this way. They make their way through an old quarantine zone, where Joel finally opens up a bit about Sarah, and Ellie gives him the photo that Tommy tried to give him back in Jackson. And after making it past some zombies in a tunnel and getting pulled into a raging river of water, they finally meet the Fireflies. Well, at least Joel meets them. Ellie is passed out, having nearly drowned, and before long, Joel is knocked out as well, as the guards to the Fireflies don't mess around. Waking up a short while later, Joel is greeted by none other than Marlene, who apparently recovered from her injuries back in Boston and made her way west to meet up with the rest of her group. She tells Joel that Ellie is alive, but that he can't see her because she's being prepped for surgery. A surgery that will ultimately kill her but allow the Fireflies to make a cure for the infection. She's willing to let Joel walk away, despite orders to kill him, and she orders one of her men to escort Joel out of the building before leaving to presumably go slaughter puppies. That last part might be a joke, but this whole situation is so outlandish that I don't even know where to fully begin. Let's pretend that the Fireflies really could make some kind of cure or vaccine from the infection inside Ellie. We'll ignore the real-world probabilities and the way that fungi works, and act like there is some kind of magical ability that they have to create and distribute some miracle cure to the whole world that will allow the rebuilding of a society like the one that existed before the initial outbreak. Even granting all of that is true, both Joel and the Fireflies are in the wrong with the events in the final few minutes of this game. In reality, the only person who should be able to make a call about whether or not to sacrifice their life to save any number of other people is the person who would need to die. Ellie is the only one who should be able to make that call, and both the Fireflies and Joel are taking away her agency. The Fireflies want to do the surgery without waking her up to tell her what is going on and what would be at stake. And Joel doesn't want to give her the chance to make the decision because he's afraid that she'll choose to die and he'll have to go through losing Sarah all over again. She should be woken up and given all the facts, including a realistic explanation of how likely a vaccine is to actually save even a single person. And she shouldn't be guilted into doing anything she doesn't want to do. And all the facts includes talking about the situation at Jackson. See, the concept here is that she would need to die to make sure humanity could go on. But it already is going on in places like Jackson and Boston, with the cordyceps fungus being something people can build their lives around just like any other threat. This isn't something that is going to stop people from living full, happy lives. It's just another possible way to die in a world that is full of ways to die already. The biggest problem here is that the Fireflies can't get out of their own way and are dead set on bringing back a world that has been lost for years. They think that they can create some kind of potion that's going to make everything better, bring back the government, and allow them to go back to the way things were prior to the cordyceps outbreak. But that's just living in a fantasy. The world has changed, and what they need to do is accept that and move forward instead of looking back. For Joel's part, he can't really be blamed for wanting to see Ellie live and have the chance to maybe someday have a family of her own. It's understandable that he would be sad, devastated even, if she wanted to give up her possible future to help make a cure. But he also needs to be willing to accept that decision if she makes it. What needs to happen here is that both the Fireflies and Joel need to sit down with Ellie and go over everything, taking time to really dig in and give her the chance to really think things through. Then, whatever decision she makes, they all need to be willing to live with it and move on. If she doesn't want to die, the Fireflies need to get over it and start focusing their energy on actually making a brighter future for humanity, rather than focusing on the past. If she chooses to give up her life, Joel needs to come to grips with the fact that sometimes the people we love die. And we should cherish the time that we get with them rather than mourn the time we didn't have. Either way, it isn't an easy decision on Ellie's part, but I know that if I were in her shoes, I would prefer to live and make the best of the way that the world is. This isn't a situation where everyone is infected and the cure is the only way society can be semi-normal again. It's a world where people just need to be a little more careful about where they go and what they eat, since the whole thing started with crops. Given the circumstances, though, I'd have to say that while I don't like the fact that Ellie's agency to make a decision is being taken away, Joel's rescue of her is a better option than the Fireflies' insane plan of killing her. At least taking her away from the hospital gives her a chance to think about it in the long run and choose to do something else later on, as opposed to being dead and unable to change that. And the violence of the Fireflies as they fight off Joel kind of hurts their case even more. He's faced with wave after wave of them as he makes his way deeper into the facility, and he winds up taking most of them out along the way. And that rampage doesn't stop when he reaches the operating room, as he even takes out the doctor, who's armed with nothing more than a scalpel. Though I can't imagine that decision ever coming back to bite him. On the way out, he even winds up killing Marlene, who is just as delusional as her Firefly compatriots, and may even be a bit worse, as she's known Ellie since the day she was born, and should have at least some kind of parental view of the situation. I mean, she says the whole thing was hard for her, but she seems just a little too eager to let Ellie die on the slim chance of making a vaccine. I wish I could end it there, but Joel winds up losing any credibility he salvaged by saving her, as he lies to her face about the situation with the Fireflies. See, she was out cold the whole time at the hospital and has no idea what happened. Joel tells her that there are plenty of other people who are immune and that she isn't needed anymore, instead of showing some character growth and being honest with her. And any respect I had for him died then and there. His motivations for saving her were selfish, but understandable, and he absolutely should have been open with her about what happened. She might not have been completely happy with it initially, but she would have understood his reasoning when confronted with what the Fireflies were planning. It's likely she would have initially thought that she wanted to give up her life, but I really do think that if things were explained properly to her, she would have come around and ended up being happy with how things turned out. I am curious to hear what you all thought about that ending, though. Was Joel right for stopping the procedure, or should he have let it go on? What would you do if you were in Ellie's shoes and had actually been given the choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Next week, we'll be moving on from the world of The Last of Us and heading back east to visit the city of Gotham in Telltale Games' Batman. That should be a lot of fun, as there are several interesting ethical dilemmas to discuss as the Dark Knight takes out criminals from all walks of life. So make sure you're subscribed to Lost in Games here on YouTube so you don't miss out on that. If you want to help me out in other ways, I've got a Patreon, channel memberships on YouTube, and a membership program on my website. Signing up for any of those and dropping a couple bucks a month my way helps me keep making great series like Philosophy and Ethics in Games, as well as others like Unscripted and Friend or Foe. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
I struggled for a long time with surviving. And you... no matter what, you keep finding something to fight for.
Now, I know that's not what you want to hear right now.
Swear to me. Swear to me that everything that you said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.